Chapter 4 Savage. Inside the imposing walls of the Commission of Counter-Ghoul headquarters, the atmosphere crackled with tension as Kuduru Amon stood before his superior, Kirio Mato. Amon's hands trembled slightly as he presented the ghoul mask he had unearthed from the gravesite of K696. Mato's eyes gleamed with a sinister light as he examined the mask, his eyes curling into a mocking smile. "Well, well, Amon," he remarked sarcastically. "How impressive of you to find this. Truly you've outdone yourself." Amon's jaw tightened at the thinly veiled mockery in Mato's tone, but he held his ground, his expression resolute. "I only did what any ghoul investigator should do," he replied evenly. Then correcting himself, "But we can't afford to waste any more time. We need to make our move." Mato's smile widened, a glint of madness dancing in his eyes. "Oh, everything has already been planned, Amon," he replied cryptically. "We're just waiting for the right moment to strike." Meanwhile, at Intaiku, the cozy cafe hummed with activity as patrons bustled in and out, seeking refuge from the harsh realities from the outside world. Among them, Kin Kaneki moved with a sense of purpose, his eyes alight with determination as he went about his task. "Kaneki, could you fetch some more coffee beans from the storage room?" Yoshimura called out from behind the counter. Kaneki nodded eagerly, excited to once again be of service, but as he made his way to the storage room, he accidentally stumbled upon a scene that would change everything. Hanami Fuegochika sat alone at a table, her delicate features illuminated by the soft glow of the overhead lights. Her eyes widened in surprise as Kaneki approached, a flush rising to her cheeks. Her kakugan were active. She was dining on human meat. However, just like a human would, with a knife, fork, and even a paper towel crumpled in her shirt, acting as a bib. Kaneki yelled, "Oh, sorry!" He then ran out of the room. Inji Koma, a seasoned waiter of Intaiku, caught Kaneki's eye and offered a knowing smile. "Seems you've interrupted Hanami's meal," he remarked with a chuckle, his large, thick nose glistening in the warm light of Intaiku. Kaneki's cheeks flushed with embarrassment as he realized his mistake, but before he could apologize, Koma waved him off. "No need to worry, Kaneki," he said reassuringly. "Just make sure you apologize, okay?" Taking Koma's advice to heart, Kaneki returned to the room Hanami was in with a steaming cup of coffee in hand. "I'm sorry for intruding," he said softly, his voice tinged with sincerity. Hanami's eyes softened at his apology, her gaze meeting his with a mixture of curiosity and warmth. "It's okay," she replied, her voice soft and melodic. "Thank you for the coffee." As they sat together, sipping their drinks in companionable silence, Kaneki couldn't help but notice the keen intelligence in Hanami's eyes. "You have a strong sense of smell," he remarked, a note of admiration in his voice. Hanami nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I can tell you're not fully a ghoul," she said matter-of-factly. "You smell different from afar." Intrigued by her observation, Kaneki slowly went into an explanation of his existence as a ghoul. His words tied up in his tongue, it took a long time to eventually force its way out. To his surprise, Hanami listened intently, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. Their conversation soon turned to lighter topics, and Kaneki's heart swelled with joy when he discovered that Hanami was reading one of his favorite books by his favorite ever author, Shin Takatsuki. "Which short story did you like best?" he asked eagerly, eager to share his passion for literature with her. But as Hanami began to recount her favorite tale, she stumbled over one of the kanji terms, her brow furrowing in confusion. Sensing her frustration, Kaneki leaned in closer, his heart pounding with fear. Could he be getting this close to a ghoul? "Sorry, I don't go to school," Hanami said, twiddling her thumbs. Kaneki gave a reassuring smile, his heartbeat becoming a strong, determined drum. "Let me help you," he said gently, his voice filled with warmth. "We can read it together." In the dimly lit confines of Intaiku, the air was thick with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the quiet murmurs of conversation. Yoshimura, the wise and enigmatic owner of the cafe, stood behind the counter, his gaze fixed on Ryuko Fueguchi as she approached him. Ryoko's expression was determined, her eyes shining with a quiet resolve as she spoke to Yoshimura. "I need to start getting my own food," she said softly, her voice tinged with determination. "I can't keep relying on Intaiku." Yoshimura regarded her with a knowing look, his eyes filled with understanding. "I understand, Ryuko," he replied gently, "but remember, you're always welcome here." Before they could delve further into their conversation, Kaneki approached them, a warm smile on his face. "Thank you for teaching me all these new words," Hanami said, her voice filled with gratitude. Kaneki's heart swelled with the warmth at her words, and he returned her smile with one of his own. "You're welcome, Hanami," he replied, his voice soft and kind. "I'm happy to help." As they, Hanami and her mother, Ryoko, left Intaiku and ventured out into the bustling city streets, Hanami's senses were suddenly tingling with unease. She paused, her eyes scanning their surroundings with a growing sense of apprehension. "There's a strange scent in the air," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I think we're being followed." Hanami's heart skipped a beat at her words, her instincts kicking into high gear as she scanned the area for any signs of danger. "Stay close," her mother said firmly, her voice laced with determination. "We'll get through this together." Meanwhile, the doves patrolled the streets. "When it rains, it hinders my ability to do my job," Mado remarked grimly, his gaze fixed on the rain-soaked streets outside. "But it also has its advantages." Amon nodded in agreement, his expression grave. "How so?" he inquired, his curiosity piqued. Mado turned to face him, a glint of intensity in his eyes. "The rain blocks out the screams of the ghouls when you exterminate them," he explained quietly, his voice tinged with resignation, "and it makes it harder for them to sense us coming." "Anyway," Mado continued, his face stretching into a grotesque smile, "Ryoko Fueguchi is nearby, I can just feel it." Hours later, the rain-soaked streets of Tokyo cast a gloomy pall over the scene as Kiryu Mado, with an air of solemnity, raised Saki Fueguchi's mask before Ryoko Fueguchi. His voice, though firm, carried a hint of urgency as he requested her to spare them a moment for questioning. Ryoko's eyes widened with a mixture of fear and apprehension as she stared at the mask, memories of her late husband flooding back. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. But before Mado could respond, the tension in the air escalated as curious bystanders began to close in on them, their intent palpable. Sensing the immediate danger, Kutaro Amon stepped forward, his posture rigid with determination. "We are Ghoul investigators," Amon declared, his voice cutting through the tense atmosphere like a knife. "You need to leave this place immediately." The realization of the peril struck like a bolt of lightning, and fear flickered across Hanami Fueguchi's face as she clutched desperately to her mother's side. Ryoko's heart clenched with the mother's instinct to protect her child, even as her own fear threatened to consume her. "Run, Hanami," Ryoko whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Get out of here." Ryoko's eyes turned jet black, red, crimson veins etched all over. With a steely resolve, Ryoko unleashed his Kagune, a deadly weapon born with her own flesh and blood. As the rain continued to fall, washing away the bloodstains of the past and obscuring the path ahead, the streets of Tokyo buzzed with life as Kin Kaneki made his way home with Intaiku, his mind still lingering on the events of the day. Lost in thought, he wandered through the crowded thoroughfares, the rhythmic patter of raindrops providing a soothing backdrop to his musings. As he walked, the voices of pedestrians drifted to his ears, snippets of conversation catching his attention. That was crazy. The mother and daughter, they looked completely human. One passerby murmured to another. Kaneki's heart skipped a beat at the mention of these unknown ghouls, his thoughts immediately turning to the mother and daughter, Ryoko and Hanami, that he had grown so fond of. Lost in contemplation, Kaneki's gaze fell upon a small card lying discarded on the wet pavement. As he bent down to pick it up, a wave of memories washed over him, Hanami's innocent face flashing before his eyes. The card, it had Hanami's name etched on it. Small, childish, girlish writing. It was her diary. Such innocence. Kaneki felt like he couldn't breathe. Like the air was so thick and clumpy that it simply couldn't be forced into his lungs. Hanami was in trouble. He had to act quick. No, even quicker than that. Meanwhile, in a secluded alleyway, Kiryu Amato stood before Ryoko Fuegichi, his expression unreadable as he observed her carefully. "You're not accustomed to fighting, are you?" he remarked, his voice low, measured as if he at any moment could burst into excited laughter, but kept it well contained. Ryoko's eyes flickered with a mixture of fear and defiance as she faced her adversary, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. "I will do whatever it takes to protect my daughter," she replied, her voice tinged with determination. Mato's lip curled into a disdainful sneer as he watched her, a flicker of disgust crossing his features. "I hate it when ghouls try to imitate humans," he spat, his tone laced with venom, "sacrificing everything for the sake of a pathetic imitation of life." With a swift motion, Mato drew his Kinkei, the gleaming blade catching the dim light of the alley. "Express your hatred, your despair," he commanded, his voice cold and merciless, "or face the consequences." A realization dawned. "That's..." Ryoko tried to speak, but her jaw slammed shut, clenching with the strength of the mountains. "Yes, yes, yes, keep doing that, Ghoul. Sorrow, despair, hatred. I want more. I want to see more." Ryoko's tears began to fall with the same ferocity and speed as the rain. "It can't be." "You guessed right, Ghoul. The Genkei's made out of your husband's Kagune." The Ghoul investigator cackled so loud that it echoed and shattered off the walls of the alleyway. The rain continued to fall in a relentless cascade as Ken Kaneki's heart pounded with worry. Fumbling for his phone, he dialed Yoshimura's number, his fingers trembling with apprehension. But as the call went unanswered, a sinking feeling settled in the pit of his stomach. "Yoshimura, where are you?" Kaneki whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. With each passing moment, his anxiety mounted, a thousand questions swirling through his mind. Could he do anything to help? Would he be able to make a difference when he reached the scene? The uncertainty gnawed at him, fueling his sense of desperation. Suddenly, a voice cut through the haze of his thoughts, calling out to him with urgency. "Kaneki!" Startled, Kaneki turned to see Hanami running towards him, her eyes wide with fear. Without hesitation, they locked eyes. A silent understanding passing between them, they had to help Hanami's mother no matter the cost. They both started running in the same direction, Kaneki following Hanami to certain death. As they approached the alley where Ryoko and Mato stood locked in a deadly confrontation, Kaneki's heart clenched with dread. He watched in horror as Mato interrogated Ryoko, his words dripping with malice and contempt. Unable to tear his gaze away, Kaneki felt a surge of helplessness wash over him. What could he possibly do in the face of such cruelty? All he could do was stand by and watch as Ryoko's fate hung in the balance. But as the scene unfolded before him, Kaneki knew that there was only one thing he could do. With trembling hands, he reached out and covered Hanami's eyes, shielding her from the gruesome sight before them. With a cruel smile twisting his lips, Kiryu Mato raised his Kinkei high above his head, the gleaming blade catching the dim light of the alley. Ryoko Fuegichi's eyes widened with terror as she realized the grim fate that awaited her. "No, please," she begged, her voice choked with fear. But Mato's heart was as cold as ice as he brought the blade down with merciless force. The sound of metal meeting flesh echoed through the alley, drowning out Ryoko's final cries. In one swift motion, the Kinkei sliced through Ryoko's neck, severing her head from her body in a spray of blood. Time seemed to stand still as her lifeless form crumpled to the ground, a pool of crimson spreading around her like a macabre halo. Kaneki could only watch in horror, his stomach churning with revulsion. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him as he realized the depths of Mato's cruelty. But even in the face of such senseless violence, Kaneki knew that he had to stay strong for Hanabi. With trembling hands, he pulled her close, shielding her from the gruesome sight before them. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the deserted streets of Tokyo as Tuka Kirishima made her way home from school. As she approached Intaiku, her heart sank at the sight of the closed sign on the door, a sense of unease gnawing at her insides. Pushing open the door, Tuka stepped into the familiar confines of the cafe, her eyes scanning the room for any signs of life. It was then that she spotted Yoshimura, his expression grave as he beckoned her to come upstairs. A sense of foreboding washed over Tuka as she ascended the stairs, her footsteps echoing in the silence of the empty cafe. As she entered the room, she was met with the sight of Yoshimura, his usually serene features marred by a look of deep sorrow. "What's wrong?" Tuka asked, her voice tinged with concern. "What's wrong?" she repeated, this time with power in her voice. Yoshimura hesitated for a moment before speaking, his voice heavy with regret. "Ryoko Fueguchi has been killed by Ghoul investigators," he admitted, his words hanging heavily in the air. Tuka's eyes widened with shock and anger at the news. Her fist clenched at her sides. "And what about Hanami?" she demanded, her voice trembling with emotion. Yoshimura sighed, his expression pained. "For now, I will keep her here at Intaiku," he replied. "But eventually, she will have to move to the 24th Ward." Tuka's anger flared at the thought of Hanami being forced to leave, her sense of injustice burning hot within her. "No," she said defiantly. "She can't live alone. We have to do something." "Did they see her face?" Tuka quickly added. "It could not be helped," Yoshimura said reluctantly. Yoshimura regarded her with a knowing look, his gaze softening with understanding. "I understand your anger, Tuka," he said gently, "but we must tread carefully. Killing the investigators will only bring more trouble upon us." But Tuka's resolve remained unshaken, her determination burning bright. "I don't care," she declared. "We have to protect Hanami at all cost, even if it means dying." "With all of our strength, all of us together," Tuka continued, "we can easily kill all of the investigators." Yomo slouched in the corner, finally spoke up. "Seriously? You really think that'll work?" Tuka looked shocked. "If a dove dies in the 20th Ward, they consider this place to have hostile ghouls. They'll just send more and more doves till we are all wiped out." Yoshimura added on to what Yomo was expressing. "We cannot afford to retaliate," he stated firmly, his gaze fixed on Tuka. "If we do, the Commission of Counter-Ghoul will perceive the 20th Ward to be filled with warlike ghouls. They will send in more investigators until every last one of us is hunted down." Tuka scoffed at the idea, her fist clenched in frustration. "Pathetic," she muttered under her breath. But Yoshimura's response was measured, his tone tinged with wisdom. "What's truly pathetic," he said softly, "is the notion of perpetuating a cycle of vengeance to the point where no one longer lives their own life." Kaneki's shoulders slumped with guilt, his voice barely above a whisper. "If only I were as strong as Tuka," he lamented, his self-doubt gnawing at him from within. "Maybe then I could have done something." The weight of his words hung heavily in the air, a tangible reminder of the toll that the recent events had taken on him. Kaneki couldn't shake the feeling of inadequacy that plagued him, his mind consumed with thoughts of what could have been. Meanwhile, high above the bustling streets of Tokyo, Tuka stood on the rooftop of a nearby building, her eyes narrowed in determination, as she watched two investigators pass below. A steely resolve settled over her. It was time to take matters into her own hands, to wipe out Ryoko's enemies and ensure that her death would not be in vain. I'm sorry I didn't pick up the call, Kaneki. If I had noticed sooner. Yoshimura's words trailed off. Kaneki shook his head. If it was Tuka and not me who showed up, maybe Mrs. Fueguchi would be. Don't blame yourself, Kaneki. Later, as Kaneki showered, he was hit by a torrent of thoughts. If I had Tuka's strength, would I have fought these ghoul investigators? They exterminate ghouls for the public's safety. It's the ghouls' fault for killing and eating people. They're not doing anything wrong. A flash of Hanami's notebook ran across his mind. He fell to his knees. They're not doing anything wrong, he repeated. I couldn't do a damn thing. Kaneki scrunched his face, trying to hold back the tears, but they flowed anyway. Tuka stood above the rooftop. She stared at the two doves, ghoul investigators. There you are. I'll avenge Ryoko, for you. The air in the dimly lit office of the Commission of Counterghoul was thick with tension, the low hum of fluorescent lights casting an eerie glow over the room. Kiryu stood at the head of the table, his pale, gaunt face a stark contrast to the darkness surrounding him. His eyes gleamed with a twisted sense of satisfaction as he addressed the room filled with fellow investigators, each one hanging on his every word. We've eliminated Ryoko Fueguchi, Mato announced, his voice cold and precise, each word enunciated with an unsettling clarity. But our work is far from over. He paused, allowing the weight of his statement to settle over the gathered investigators. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of rain tapping against the windows. Case 745, Kato continued, his tone growing more intense. The daughter, Hanami Fueguchi, we must find her next. The mention of Hanami's name sent a ripple of unease through the room. Mato's obsession with the Fueguchi family was well known, but now it had taken on a new urgency. His gaze swept over the room, taking in the solemn faces of his colleagues, the hunger for victory evident in their eyes. Soon, Mato said, a slow, sinister smile curling on his lips. Everyone in the Commission of Counterghoul will be basking in the glory of victory. His words hung in the air like a promise, or perhaps a curse. The restaurant buzzed with the low hum of conversation, the clinking of silverware against plates, and the soft murmur of waitstaff moving between tables. Kuturu Amon, Ippei Kusaba, and Yasutomo Nakajima sat at the corner table, their uniforms a stark contrast to the casual atmosphere around them. The three men were deep in discussion, their voices low, yet the weight of their conversation created an invisible barrier between them and the rest of the diners. Amon leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed in thought. Case 696, he said, the words heavy with significance. It's been on my mind. The way Ryoko Fueguchi carried herself, her mannerisms. It all reminds me of the binge eater. There's certain tragedy in these cases, don't you think? Kusaba nodded, his expression serious. It's disturbing how similar they are, especially considering how difficult they were in their methods. But the patterns, they can't be ignored. And now with the gourmet on our radar, it feels like we're barely scratching the surface of something big, something much bigger. Nakajima, the quietest of the three, added, it's unnerving how the law works against ghouls, and yet some still manage to slip through the cracks. What were we taught at the academy? It's almost like a blueprint, but reality has its way of defying the rules. Say, were there any girls at the academy? Kusaba asked, prodding Nakajima, trying to relieve the tension. Amon's gaze hardened, ignoring Kusaba's comment. That's why we need to be vigilant. The law is our guide, but out here, it's up to us to enforce it. We can't afford to be complacent, he said as he placed some yen on the table and slung his dark jacket over his shoulder. Kusaba, who had been quiet, finally for a moment looked up at Amon with a hint of admiration in his eyes. Amon, you're the kind of investigator we all strive to be. You don't just follow the rules, you embody them. It's inspiring. They all called out the door, Amon walking uncomfortably, unused to such praise. And I'm not just saying that because you paid for a meal. Kusaba's eyes widened in shock as he stumbled, his hand flying to his face, where a thin, precise slash had suddenly appeared. Blood trickled down his cheek, warm and startling against the cool night air. His head split open, spraying blood like a battered hose. His hand dropping off and splatting onto the ground, he finally collapsed. Nakajima reacted instinctively, spinning around to locate the source of the attack. His heart pounded as the sight of a figure lurking in the shadows. A slender girl, her face concealed by a chilling rabbit mask. "Watch out!" Nakajima shouted, his voice edged with panic. But before he could move to defend himself, the girl was already closing in, her movements swift and calculated. Amon stepped forward without hesitation, placing himself between Nakajima and the masked assailant. His eyes narrowed as he assessed her, noting the fluidity in her movements, the cold precision in her attack. "Stay back," he commanded, his voice calm but authoritative. "She's a ghoul." Nakajima hesitated, the reality of the situation sinking in. "A ghoul? How do you know?" Amon's gaze remained fixed on the rabbit-masked girl, who had paused a few feet away, her posture tense and ready. "The way she moves," he replied, his tone leaving no room for doubt. No human could strike with that kind of speed and accuracy. Tuka Kirishima, concealed behind her mask, could feel the weight of Amon's scrutiny. Her plan to ambush the investigators was falling apart. These weren't just any CCG agents. They were seasoned, and they were prepared. She took a cautious step back, her mind racing as she considered her next move. "You're not getting away!" Amon yelled at the top of his lungs. The air around them crackled with tension as Tuka Kirishima unleashed her Kagune. The glowing wing-like appendage erupted from her back, each feather like shard shaped enough to cut through the night itself. The once quiet street now buzzed with the deadly energy of the ghoul prepared to fight. Amon's eyes narrowed as he studied her. "Ukaku," he muttered, recognizing the type of ghoul before him. His mind raced as he evaluated the situation. The Ukaku's Kagune was known for its speed and the precision, able to follow crystalline projectiles with lethal accuracy. "If she hits me with one of those," he thought grimly, "it's over." As Amon braced himself, Kiriomato stepped forward out of the darkness, as if summoned by violence. His expression was a mix of focused intent and something that bordered on excitement. "Stay calm, Amon," Mato instructed, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. He reached into the case slung over his shoulder, opening it with the practiced motion. "This is no time to lose your composure. Watch closely, and I'll show you how to properly use a Kinkei." Mato's demeanor was unsettlingly calm, as if the dangerous ghoul before them was no consequence. He drew his Kinkei with a fluid motion, the weapon gleaming ominously under the streetlights. With confidence that bordered on arrogance, he advanced towards Tuka, his eyes narrowing in anticipation. Tuka acted first. She didn't close the distance. Instead, she raised her Kagune, and a barrage of feather-like projectiles shot out, each one aimed with deadly precision. Mato anticipated the attack. Moving swiftly to dodge the incoming shards, he'd sidestepped with ease, countering with a strike from his Kinkei. But Tuka was faster than he expected, her form blurring as she darted out of the range, evading his counter with a grace that caught Mato by surprise. "She's quick," Mato murmured, a hint of surprise in his voice. His eyes locked onto Tuka, observing the way she maneuvered with a fluidity that reminded him of another ghoul he had faced. "She moves just like a Saki," he remarked, recalling the battle with Ryoko Fuegichi's husband. Amon watched the exchange, his grip tightening on his own weapon. Despite Mato's experience, Tuka was proving to be a formidable opponent, her speed and agility keeping her one step ahead of the seasoned investigator. But Mato, Ever the tactician wasn't deterred. Ukako ghouls like her, Mato began, his tone turning analytical, rely heavily on their speed and their Kagone's projectiles. It's their greatest asset, but also their greatest weakness. They burn through the stamina quickly. The longer this fight drags on, the more their attacks lose potency, and their ability to dodge weakens. She won't be able to keep this up for long. As if testing his own theory, Mato adjusted his approach. He focused on wearing Tuka down, using measured attacks to force her to expand more energy with every dodge and every barrage of projectiles she fired. Tuka, sensing the shift in Mato's strategy, gritted her teeth. She could already feel the strain beginning to take its toll, her muscles starting to ache from the constant motion that she repeated use of her Kagune. But she wasn't about to let up. Not when so much was at stake. Tuka's breath came in ragged grasp, her body trembling with exhaustion. The relentless pace of the battle had drained her, each movement becoming slower, each dodge less precise. Mato's relentless strategy had worked. The once dazzling speed of her Ukaku Kagune had diminished, and now she could barely keep up with his attacks. Mato saw his opportunity. With a swift and brutal strike, he knocked Tuka to the ground, her body hitting the pavement with a sickening thud. The pain radiated through her, and she struggled to push herself up, her vision blurring from the effort. Her once vibrant Kagune flickered weakly behind her, no longer the lethal weapon it had been moments ago. "You're slowing down," Mato noted with a cold, detached tone as he loomed over her. His kinke gleamed in the dim light, poised for another strike. "It's no wonder so many CCG investigators have fallen to your kind," he continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "Ukaku ghouls like you, with your speed and your arrogance, you think you can outrun us forever. But you all burn out eventually." Tuka's mind raced as she lay on the cold pavement, her body screaming in pain. She knew she had to escape. There was no way she could continue fighting like this. Every muscle in her body ached, and her Kagune, which had once been her greatest strength, now felt like a burden too heavy to bear. Mato raised his weapon, preparing to deliver the final blow. "This is the end for you, Rabbit," he sneered, recognizing her now as the notorious Rabbit Ghoul that had eluded the CCG for so long. But just as Mato moved to strike, Tuka mustered the last of her strength. With a desperate burst of energy, she rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the deadly arc of Mato's kinke. She forced herself to her feet, ignoring the searing pain in her arm, and bolted into the night, her movements unsteady but fueled by sheer willpower. Mato watched her retreat, his eyes narrowing in frustration. "You can't run forever," he muttered, under his breath, lowering his weapon as he realized she had managed to slip through the grasp once again. His frustration was tempered by a grudging respect for her tenacity. She had managed to escape, but he knew she was seriously injured. As Tuka fled into the darkness, she clutched her arm. Wincing as the pain intensified with each step, blood seeped through her fingers, staining the fabric of her sleeve. Her arm was so seriously injured, the damage done by Mato's attacks far worse than she had initially realized. She needed to find a safe place to hide, to recover, but the pain was overwhelming. She struggled to keep moving. With every step, her vision grew dimmer, her body crying out for rest. But she couldn't stop. Not yet. Not until she was far enough away from Mato, far enough to be safe.